So, the next session is from myself. As I mentioned earlier, PEFC published their revised Project Sourcing Certification Standard on Monday. Just a side step here in terms of that Timber Square has gone through PEFC Project Certification. So a certificate is imminent for this project. So yeah, just talk a little bit about that, and then also the new requirements. Just an overview of what I'll talk about. We'll look at an overview and history of PEFC project certification. A little bit about the new standard development process, so we know an idea of who is involved in the development. An overview of the key principles and requirements. This isn't a deep dive into every technical clause of the standard, but just an overview of the principles of the standard. I'm happy to discuss the technicalities with anybody who wants to know more. The certification process, just an outline of that. We've got a number of our certification bodies here as well today, so it'll be good for them to understand that as well. And then also trademark use around projects, and obviously an important thing that organisations who want to go with certification want to be able to promote the fact they're going that and use the trademarks correctly to enable them to make statements and claims about their projects. Okay, so just a little bit of an overview about project certification and what it is. It's a management system that is based on the chain of custody requirements that can be applied to projects rather than specific products. So actually a project like this, it's actually what happens within the scope of this project and in terms of timber procurement in relation to the project itself. It demonstrates, it allows certificate holders, developers, contractors to demonstrate responsible sourcing for a project, and also they've got traceability of those timber products back to either a certified origin or a controlled origin, depending on the timber. In terms of the history, the first certified project was the Lighthouse building at the Zaragoza 2008 Expo. This was based purely on the chain of custody requirements. So at this time, PEFC didn't have any specific project certification requirements. 2012 was a bit of a milestone in the UK and globally, and it was the first project that achieved both FSC and PEFC dual project certification. In 2014, that was the point at which PEFC actually came up with the first set of requirements. They were tucked away in a guidance document that was associated with the 2013 version of the chain of custody standard. At the point at which we revised the chain of custody standards in 2020, that guidance document became more and more distant and was getting out of date by the day. And interestingly as well, case in point here was when Timber Square engaged Preferred by Nature to do the audits here. Charles Townsend phoned me up and said, "John, do PEFC have any project certification requirements?" I had to steer him in the right direction to those. So yeah, this was on the agenda for PEFC International to revise these requirements, and this is what we've been working on over the last 18 months. And in terms of the types of projects that can be certified, there's a lot of variation. So this is the Austrian pavilion at the recent expo in Osaka. This is a house in Malaysia made out of glulam, achieved certification last year. Notre Dame de Paris, the rebuild of this following the fire, 95% of the timber in there was PEFC certified. And then also, this is the Club Madeiras Travern Pavilion, Wall Thistleton designed, just achieved project certification, a lovely little structure. In terms of the UK, we've had a limited number of PEFC projects, but actually we've had an increase in the last couple of years. As I mentioned previously, Olympic Park, Kingsgate House in London, residential development from CLT in 2014. Current ongoing project, HMS Victory, 10-year conservation project. All of the external planking to the hull of the ship is going to be replaced. It's about 330 cubic metres of timber that's going to go in there. It's all going to be oak. Idea is PEFC certified. They are just getting themselves ready for their first audit, so they will be either the first or one of the first certificates that's issued against the new requirements. Incidentally, well worth a visit. This is fully public accessible. You can go into this area of the building, there's a glazed screen and you can see the shipwrights and carpenters at work. It's really interesting, so I would recommend a visit. The whole museum is fascinating. And obviously Timber Square, which is just completed and certificate is imminent for this. So you see the variation in the projects that can be certified. So in terms of the new standard development process, as I mentioned previously, the requirements were not normative, they were tucked away in the guidance document. What we wanted to do was come up with a standalone set of requirements that were normative, and it would enable a consistent approach by certificate holders. So what we found is the way that certain companies were applying the project certification requirements was different in some countries and others. So a project in Japan could look a little bit different than a project in the UK, which we didn't agree with. So actually was having the normative requirements that provide a consistent approach to certification. We wanted the standard, given the fact it was going to be a standalone, that was more aligned with construction terminology as well. So actually the usability of the standard was really important in the development process. We also wanted it to provide additional benefits. So actually could project certification be a potential framework for demonstrating compliance with other green building standards, BREEAM, LEED, etc. A clear auditing framework as well as a consistent approach by certificate holders. We also wanted a consistent approach by certification bodies as well. And again, what we found when we started to look at the way project certification was implemented was that the auditing kind of schedules were very different in different countries depending on the certification body. So again, technical on that was really important. We also wanted to enable use of the PEFC trademarks during the project. So under the current requirements, you can only use the label after the project's finished and you're issued your certificate. Now in a project like HMS Victory that's 9 years, for them to start the project certification now but only be able to really communicate about it in 9 years' time isn't very practical. So we wanted to come up with a mechanism that enabled usage from the very start. The development process was establishment of a task force that consisted, to write the standard, that consisted of PEFC International technical staff, representatives from the national governing bodies. I was lucky enough to be on the task force, certification body representatives, and also representatives from the construction industry. So BAM in the Netherlands had representation. Tom King, who's in the room from McAlpine, was on the task force. So actually getting that input from construction representatives who would actually be using the standard. The task force then produced a series of working drafts. They went to public consultation. We had a couple of those, ended up with revised drafts, and then we had a couple of pilot tests in the UK. HMS Victory was one of those, and then also Bovis signed up for a pilot for one of the Lend-Lease projects at Elephant Park. Fiona's here today. Many thanks, Fiona, for your input. Pilot's really valuable, allows us to road test the requirements, get feedback from potential users, and some of the input we received was really useful, and also go through an audit process, so actually getting feedback from the certification bodies as well. So really, many thanks to Bovis, many thanks to NQA who did the audit of that. And then the standard goes for approval by the national members of PEFC, and then we have the publication, which was on Monday. So the standard is now live. This is the standard here, and then we have the associated certification body requirements. The structure of the standard, again, is set out with the introduction, the 4 sections which contain the key requirements, and then there's a couple of normative appendix as well. I think in total, these requirements total 8 to 9 pages of requirements. One thing that we wanted to do was have the standard pretty lean, pretty usable. The first draft, I think we have to admit, we were a bit onerous in what we were expecting, and the feedback we got from the public consultation was really useful, and it allowed us to kind of strip out a lot of requirements that were not deemed to be necessary. So a really useful process. So in terms of key principles of the new standard, so it provides a management system for organisations to source timber responsibly from PEFC certified sources. There is provision now for inclusion of materials sourced from other certification schemes, I'll speak a bit more about later, and from controlled sources. So actually uncertified timber can be used, provided it's gone through a full due diligence process in accordance with the PEFC requirements. So really the core of the standards requirements around procurement, material handling to ensure there's no risk of mixing on project sites, and then also due diligence that's applied to the timber itself. And this allows organisations to demonstrate and communicate their responsible sourcing for projects through a project declaration that will be published on the PEFC database, and then also the use of the trademark by both the certificate holder and then the building owner afterwards as well. Because many of these buildings, the certificate holder will be the construction company, and then they will pass over the building to the developer or building owner who may want to continue to communicate about the project. One thing we were keen to include is that if a company gets certification, and they may include certain elements of a project within that scope of certification, any of the timber they're sourcing that may not be in scope must be legally sourced. And also as an organisation, through any of their operations, they cannot be involved in corrupt practices. So there's these things we wanted to make sure there was a mechanism that a PEFC certificate wasn't being just put in front of some illegal or corrupt practices by the organisation. So in terms of what can be covered, in terms of a project, can be new builds, renovations, infrastructure, public and private development, so real flexibility in terms of the application of the standard. One thing that we've changed is the project, the certificate can be issued to a single project, so it could just be the certificate lasts for the duration of the project, or there can be a continuous project certification. So if an organisation has numerous projects, they can establish a continuous certification, they can add projects into that certification, as well as kind of developers, contractors, some of our existing chain of custody certificate holders. This model may fit them better because we have a few who are construction companies who run through a multi-site certificate for chain of custody, and actually they're receiving materials directly to sites, and the sites on their multi-site are the sites they're working at. So actually it provides an alternative model of certification. Types of certificate holder can just be a single certificate holder, for example, MACE group. Could be a multi-site, so a number of linked entities. So it could be a multinational construction company who has different legal entities in different countries. They could have all be on the same certificate. And then also we're applying a group structure as well. So actually when you have smaller, organised smaller projects, it allows to have a group manager who then supports and facilitates certification on smaller projects as well. So in terms of the entities involved in project, we have the organisation who is basically the certificate holder, who's overall responsible for managing the project. We then have the project members. To qualify as a project member, you must either procure, either processing on site or installing on site. Those project members can be PEFC certified, or they don't have to be certified. So you can have an uncertified contractor working on the project site who receives deliveries of certified material to the project site, and the chain of custody still can be fully accounted for within the project. In terms of suppliers, differential here, that they're just there to deliver to the project, and they need to have PEFC certification if they are delivering PEFC claim materials to the site. Also, as I said before, there is provision now for a proportion of other certified materials. So again, if companies are supplying those other certified materials, they need to have valid certification as well against the alternative scheme. So in terms of the starting point is established in the scope of the project. So the organisation who's implementing the certification needs to identify which products they want to be included within the scope. It can be everything in the project, or it can be certain items that they select. So for example, on the project here, the scope of the PEFC project includes the CLT, the glue lamp and the reclaimed flooring. Other items weren't included in the PEFC project. That is fine and continues. So here, for example, we've got an organisation who may be including CLT within their scope, storage systems and units, so it could be fitted wardrobes in apartments, and then kitchen units and worktops. So the categorization is by using the PEFC product categories. Slight issue with those is they're quite generic, so they're not really project specific. So what we also will allow is that there can be a short project specific description that will go on the certificate and go on the database as well. So there's actually some project specific information that we use. Each of these items is then categorised or referred to as an installed component in the project. So in terms of qualification for certification, so a finished project is PEFC certified if combined the installed components consist of at least 70% PEFC certified material in either metre cube or tonnes, and every installed component within the scope includes at least 70% certified content, which comes from either PEFC certified material or PEFC controlled sources from other certified materials. So alternative schemes can make up a proportion of that material, provided that alternative scheme meets PEFC's definition of controversial sources. So, just a little example of how that would work. So, if we have a project that includes 300 cubic metres of 100% PEFC certified CLT, we then have 50 cubic metres of storage systems supplied under another scheme with a 70% claim, and then we have kitchen units and worktops supplied 30 cubic metres from 70% PEFC certified material, 40 cubic metres with 100% claim from another certification scheme. So, at an overall project level, the PEFC certified content is 76%. So we have 300 cubic metres from the 100%, we have 70% of 30, which is 21 cubic metres. I've done the math before I came, Paul, don't worry. And then, so that gives us 321 cubic metres divided by the total volume, which is 420, gives us 76%. So we're qualified on that front. Then at an installed component level, in terms of looking at certified content, the 300 cubic metres of CLT is 100%, so it's 100% certified content. The fitted wardrobes have 70% certified content, which come from the scheme, and then the combination of the 7% PEFC certified material and the 40 cubic metres with the 100% claim from the other scheme gives us 87% certified content. So that will qualify for project certification. So, in terms of when we look at real world potential then, so two projects here. We've got Bywater Properties Paradise, used 2,100 cubic metres of 100% PEFC certified CLT. That gives it potential to include 900 cubic metres of other certified material, provided that other scheme meets PEFC's definition of controversial sources. Timber Square here, looking at 6,300 cubic metres of CLT. Potentially there, 2,700 cubic metres of other certified material could be incorporated and would still allow us to meet that 70% threshold. So an indication I've got is actually the volume of other timber used in this project could have been covered under a single PEFC project certificate under the new requirements. So in terms of the certification process, organisations who want to achieve certification, initially they would engage with a certification body. They would agree a schedule, timescales, costs of certification. The organisation then develops their management system. They're required to conduct an internal audit before the initial certification body audit. Initial certification body occurs. There may be some preconditions that are raised from that, but have to be closed, after which the certificate can be issued. When that certificate is issued after that first audit, so on the PEFC database, there'll be a certificate holder on there, and then there'll be the project registered as an ongoing project. So there'll be two registrations there. So rather than under the current requirements, the project's only listed at the end of the project, it'll be on there from the very start. Then there'll be a number of annual surveillance audits by the certification body. In the case of a continuous certification that may include multiple projects, that auditing of those projects will be done on a sampling basis. And then for single projects, there'll then be a final audit at the completion of the project. At that point, once that audit is completed, the project gets listed as a completed project on the database, and the certificate of the organisation who's seeking that single project is then terminated. But the project stays on the database permanently from that point. And likewise for organisations running continuous, once the project is completed, the project's listed as a completed project and then becomes independent of the scope of the multi-project certificate. Trademark use, once the certificate has been issued, we will then be notified. If it's in the UK, PEFC UK will be notified. We would then put it onto the database and we would issue the trademark licence to the organisation. Once they sign that, send it back to us, we'll give them access to the label generator. The organisation then has the opportunity to use the trademark and a number of approved messages in relation to the project. And that can be directly on the project, so it could be on the site hoarding, could be plaques on the building, and that can be run during the project and afterwards, and also indirectly on projects, sustainability reports, websites, etc., etc. Also, and this actually came directly from feedback from Fiona, was the mechanism that allows that trademark. So, for example, in relation to Timber Square, if we applied the new requirements, Mace Group would be the licence holder during the course of the project, but at the end of the project, they hand the building over to Landsec. Gregor might say, well, actually, we want to carry on using the trademark and use it on our website. So now there's a mechanism where that trademark licence can be passed on to the building owner as part of the handover of the building. So again, just trying to kind of make the standard more practical, more usable, etc. So that's the run through of the standard. The QR code there will take you to a copy of the standard. Like I say, we are in the process now. The standard's published, certification body requirements are published, and yeah, the say HMS Victory is likely to be the first project, which is a good positive note for PEFC. Thank you for listening. Happy to answer any questions that you have, and I hope it wasn't too techy.